I just want to mention one thing. It's low-hanging fruit, and that is for approaching NIH. There is a K-12 program in emergency care research. There are 4 centers. Does anybody know about this program? Okay, it's for junior faculty. It is 3 years, 2 to 3 years of research training. The entities that are currently funded are Vanderbilt, Michigan, Indiana, and Oregon Health and Science Center. There is 1 more year. So if you know anybody who really wants to get going with their research career, there are several slots available. And I'll point out Mark as one of the people, Mark Probst from Sinai is one of the success stories out of the K-12 program. He came in for a year and got his K, and now he's doing great guns. So there's a walking, talking success story for you.
Great, so we'll open up to any questions whatsoever.
Can I just make a comment? It was a very wonderful presentation about the LRPs. Probably the most critical part of that is your mentor. If you don't have a really good, strong mentor, it's going to be very much more difficult. So that is the key here, and really try and really focus on that. The other thing that you mentioned, you've mentioned, it looked like the average award was about $50,000. So bear in mind, for you to have $50,000 to pay back your loans, you're probably earning about $80,000. So that's the kind of money that this is saving you. So it's a phenomenal opportunity, and you should and it's surprisingly unknown, I think.
I also just want to make sure everyone knows the difference between new investigator and early stage investigator when you're going for the R award. New investigator is anyone who's never had NIH funding. Early stage is if you do apply for your first NIH funding within the first 10 years after your seminal degree. And so you want to take advantage of that if you can. If you're still within 10 years of finishing your last degree, try to get your application in. And there's a merit award, an R37, that many institutes, including NCI, they're now taking advantage of. And I just found out this morning that one of my early stage investigators who we just funded an R01 has won this merit award because it's internal, that we put people forward. And what this means is this investigator is now not only going to have 5 years of funding, but now up to 7 years automatically, because we believe that the work they're doing is instrumental, so they get an expedited ability to put in a new application in a few years to get that extra 2 years of funding. So we're really working hard at NIH to get more funding to our early stage and new investigators. So I encourage you to go early.
I'm curious to know about the so-called ESI bump and how it relates to R01s and with the new definition of the clinical trials and how they're trying to push people to the R33 mechanism, which apparently does not have the ESI bump any longer. And I understand this is kind of a moving target, so I'm just wondering what the latest is on that topic.
So as of today, which is all I can speak to, is that ESI bump across institutes does vary, but each institute has a different bump. And so currently at NCI, our pay line for an R01 is 9th percentile, but we're bumping up, I think it's currently 15 percentile for early stage investigators. And we are trying to push R33, R34, these kind of pre-planning awards. It really is just constantly changing whether or not they're going to apply to that, and it really comes down to budget. So you have to remember, NIH, we don't get a budget, yearly budget, until Congress gives us one, which we got ours just a few months ago. Appropriations are just happening, so we've been on a limited budget. So 10 to end of year, policies continue to change, and they change on a yearly basis. As far as the clinical trial component, there's some mechanisms that we are seeing changes in those bumps, but as far as the clinical trial infrastructure overall, that really doesn't apply, if that makes sense.
I hope you don't mind if I just add something to that. So really important, again, the institutes do this very differently. What NCI does isn't what NHLBI does, and so on. So the ESI is tremendous. I'll give you an example. At NANDS, which is where my office is, they pay up to the 15th percentile. But they give a bump of 10 points to an ESI, which means you can be out 24, 25, which is way beyond the pay line. And you'll get pushed to the front of the line and get funded. So it's really quite a remarkable opportunity. And for many of you, you're sort of scratching your head and you're saying, when does the 10-year clock start? So I know that it starts after your fellowship if you're doing one. And the other thing is, the way that this is calculated is it's a machine that does it. So if you're not sure what your ESI status is, it'll either be very clear to some of us, or it'll be a little bit opaque. And the way NIH wants you to figure it out is to go in and to open a profile in the RA Commons, and the computer will ask you all kinds of interesting and personal questions, and then when it's all done, it'll spit out whether or not you are an ESI eligible person. And as you said, it's a great opportunity. You can have had some kind of NIH funding. They're limited. It's not like you know, if you had an R01, you're out the game. But if certain grants will still allow you to apply for that ESI funding. So do take advantage of it. As I said, the bump is a little bit different at different places, but what an opportunity.
If I can talk also about K awards and differences in funding levels. In the first K-12 program, we ultimately trained a total of 43 people at 3 years each, and that group is now going after K awards. And at this point, 60% of the original trainees have K awards, which is a fairly high rate. But we had people in discrete areas like pediatric respiratory illness or pediatric this, that, and the other thing. And if you compare the pay lines, Child Health is paying to 14 on their K grants. NHLBI has been funding for the last 2 years to 33. 10 is perfection. You know, the bigger the pay. So we're paying many more dollars for K grants. We're paying to a score of 32, and it's phenomenal. And so we had a number of people that originally went to NICHD and then subsequently came in with a new application to Heart, Lung, and Blood, and they got it. So we've got a bunch of people that are now, they're pediatricians, but they're funded by us because of the other aspect of their research. It's pulmonary, it's heart, it's blood. Okay?
And I'll just add that pay lines don't mean that a certain institute is paying more or paying less. It's based on the denominator of applications that they're receiving. So people have kind of noted that NCI's pay lines continue to drop. It's because we're receiving more and more applications that are scoring extremely well. So before we would receive, 100 applications that all scored 15th percentile and less, so we could pay for those. Well, now we're having 100 applications scoring 9th percentile and less. So it doesn't really mean the amount, but that's where, again, contacting the program officer, we can help you think about what institute is best. Where would your chances be best based on your science, based on the review we believe you can get, based on who you're going to be competing with in that institute, the other grants that we know that are coming in.
I apologize also if this was covered earlier. I'm sorry I came in late.
No, that's fine.
Can you guys talk a little bit about what kind of research training is required or desired for a competitive K award application? If my institution just doesn't have a ton of options, how do I navigate that?
Okay. Basically, you need to assess whether or not you need to look at your institution. There are some institutions that are overtly hostile to people applying for K grants because they do not support research because they don't pull in their full clinical salary. So you need to take a really good look at your environment. Do you have support? Do you have the science? Do you have institutional support that will help you along? If so, it generally takes 3 or so years to get, so that's either KL2 training through a CTSA, K-12 training through the NHLBI K-12 program, or a T32 grant, which are postdoctoral fellow grants. When we see the Ks come in, there are a couple of issues we want to know. And there's no requirement per se, but they want to know, can you stand on your own 2 feet? Do you have a history of interest in research? What have you done previously? Is this an old passion or a new passion? Do you have a fabulous mentoring team so that it's hard to fail? And so these are the elements that go in. We also, at least the K review committees at Heart, Lung, and Blood, take a look at where you are in the spectrum. How many papers do you have? If you're an MD, PhD, and you've got 20 papers, that's great. If you come in with less than that, but you haven't had the trajectory, have not had the investment in research, you didn't get your aha till late, then you tell your story and you tell how you got to where you are now. So I would say you need to surround yourself with people who understand the K Awards, who can help you with the K Awards, you need to get hold of K Awards. If you know what institute you're interested in, you can go in and read the abstracts of the currently funded K Awards. So these are all different ways of identifying both the topic as well as creating, a solid place where you can jump into research.
And I'm going to quote Jeremy Brown. Don't get it original, get it right. And just speaking about my experience, the first thing I did when I was thinking about writing a K is I read about 6 other people's Ks who had been funded. I'm actually not at the mic to say that. I had a question, and it's about kind of etiquette of how many POs can you reach out to and talk with before you're considered weird?
Depends on if those POs talk to each other. I would say if you find a PO that really has the expertise you're looking for in an institute, you really stop there unless they're non-responsive. And at that point, you can actually identify easily who their branch chief is and see if there's someone else within that branch that could assist you, because different people have different travel schedules, workloads, and such. But if your research crosses 3 institutes, I would expect you to talk to 3 POs, 1 in each institute. And you can call me and say, you know what, Annie K, I also talked to Jane Scott over in NHLBI, and this is what her thoughts are. And sometimes I'll pick up the phone and call Jane and say, what are we thinking on this? And so don't hesitate to make sure you're talking to people who represent your science. But if you're starting to call and we start hearing, okay, so-and-so's just looking for the right answer, the answer they want to hear, that is going to get around.
And that does happen. It does happen a lot. We're structured, so there are 5 of us that do research training and career development, and when you get somebody who calls each office, after a while they are shopping for you to make a mistake and give them the answer they want.
I think we're up on time here, but thank you everyone for attending, and I'm sure some of our program officers would be happy to take questions out in the hall afterwards. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not sure I understand.